was in OPD, and the parents were actually in a lot of despair and anxiety because they had actually went treatment at multiple hospitals with no clinical benefit. So beginning with the case, so we had Master M, 5 years old boy, resident of Muzaffarnagar, who was admitted with us for 1 day and is still under follow-up in OPD. So it come to us with the presenting complaints of difficulty in standing and walking for 3 years. So actually the mother had noticed that there was delay in attainment of motor milestones since the beginning itself. He had started standing without support at 15 months and walking independently at 2 years of age. Subsequently, what the parents noticed was that there was difficulty in standing and walking, that he was not able to get up from his sitting position, and it used to be transient. But actually this delay in development milestones was he was able to catch up later. He was even able to walk, go up and down, climb upstairs and downstairs, but he was actually unable to run. And when he was trying to run, he had a clumsy gait leading to frequent falls. On asking leading questions, there was history of freezing episodes after a prolonged periods of rest. He always had difficulty in actually initiating a movement after a period of rest. But after walking for a few steps, he did give the history of improvement in his symptoms. Also, there was lack of clarity in speech. There was no history of any short-term, long-term or seasonal fluctuation of symptoms. There was no periodic weakness or painful muscle contractions or worsening of these symptoms on exposure to cold. There was no fluctuation of symptoms on day-to-day basis, and there was no history suggestive of any distal weakness like slippage of slippers or difficulty in buttoning, unbuttoning, or any thinning of extremities, floppiness or tightness in the limbs. There was no history of any involuntary movements or any sensory impairment like tingling sensations or numbness, positive and negative sensory symptoms. There was no history of any loss of smell, taste, hearing, vision, deviation of eyes, double vision, drooping of eyelids, drooling of saliva, voice change, or any swallowing difficulty. Also, he had normal cognition, no history of seizures, memory loss, no history of any jerky eye movements, any incoordination during the task, and there was no history of any excessive sweating, coldness, giddiness, palpitations, and he had no bowel bladder incontinence. His birth history was normal. He was full-term, born by normal vaginal delivery, cried immediately after birth with no history of NICU stay, had a smooth perinatal transition and uneventful postnatal period. So his development history, as discussed before, he had an initial developmental delay to begin with, but he was able to catch up, and actually he had normal milestones in his gross motor, fine motor, social and language. He was able to catch up with his motor milestones. His main problem was with the speed, not with the muscular strength or the incoordination during any of the activities. So he was able to do all the routine activities. He was able to hop on one foot. He was able to write. He knew his full name, age and gender, and he was able to tell stories and poems as well. His developmental quotient in all these sectors and in overall assessment was 100%. He was also able to do his routine activities properly. He was able to feed. He is able to feed himself. He had good interaction and playing with peers. And he had no issues with dressing or undressing. He was able to dress and undress independently. And he was dry by night by the age of 3 years itself. So also further doing the developmental profile assessment, he had above average scores in all the 6 domains of physical, adaptive behavior, social, emotional, cognitive, communication and general development per se. Then coming to the family history, he was actually born of a 3rd-degree consanguineous marriage. There was no history of any diabetes, hypertension or any neurological illness in the family. There was no Mytonian mother or the elder brother, but he was born of a 3rd-degree consanguineous marriage. Coming to the treatment history, he had actually, as discussed, visited multiple hospitals. He was evaluated multiple times. He was given various medications, but none of them had ever brought a clinical benefit. In fact, the parents were told that the child is suffering from a muscle disease in which he is likely to become non-ambulatory within the next 10 years and might die subsequently. Probably they had suspected some muscular dystrophy. This dietary history, he was vegetarian. He had a calorie deficit of 15% and protein deficit of 10%. On examination, his anthropometry was well preserved. He had normal weight and height with BMI of 17. Then on general examination, his vitals were normal. And as we can see here, that this child had bilateral increased muscle bulk and muscular hypertrophy. As we can see that he has muscular hypertrophy. We can see deltoid contour. The biceps are also hypertrophied. Similarly, in this picture, also the pectoralis major muscles and the rectus abdominal muscles are also hypertrophied. Similarly, in the back, we can see that the deltoid contour is increased, the biceps has increased bulk, and also the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, and the paraspinous and periscapular muscles are also hypertrophied. So he had a generalized muscular hypertrophy with Herculean appearance. Also, he had myopathic faces and he had an open mouth. Then coming to the higher mental functions, he was awake, he was conscious, he was well oriented to time, place and person, had good attention, intact memory, and he had some dysarthria. Like when we asked him to speak, then he had difficulty in initially speaking. He had probably because of myotonia and muscular facial weakness, he was having difficulty in articulation of the words. But on further reading, he was able to speak with more clarity. So as you can see that his name was Muaz, but he was not able to articulate it properly. Then his cranial nerves were all intact. On motor examination, as we saw that he had bilaterally symmetrically increased bulk, he had an Herculean appearance, and tone was normal in all the 4 limbs. His power was almost 5/5 in all other muscular groups, but he had bilateral lower limb proximal muscle weakness, and the power was 4+/5 in bilateral hip flexors. And as we'll see in this video, he was able to sit, but when we asked him to get up from the sitting position, he had modified Gower sign, suggesting some proximal limb weakness. So as we could see in this video, then when we asked him to get up, he had to take support of his upper limbs to get up because of his bilateral proximal lower limb weakness. Then otherwise his deep tendon reflexes were normal and his plantars were flexor. His sensory examination was normal. All sensations including pain, temperature, vibration and position sense were intact. His cerebellar functions were also intact. There was no past pointing, intentional tremors, dysdiadochokinesia or any incoordination. But he had a waddling gait. So further, what was the most striking feature in our patient was that he had myotonia, which was actually missed in all of his previous admissions in outside hospitals. So here we'll see the tongue myotonia, that when we percuss the tongue with the help of a hammer, so there will be actually a dent, production of a dent, and there will be grooving in the there will be lateral grooving. So when we percuss, we can see that there is grooving which is occurring laterally, and this child had tongue myotonia. He also had hand myotonia and grip myotonia, that when we asked him to open his fist after a prolonged time, then he was actually able to open his fist very slowly and in a clumsy way. So we had asked him to close his fist tightly, and then when we asked him to open his fist, he was able to do it in a very slow way. Also, he had percussion myotonia, that when we percussed on the thinner eminence, we could see dent formation, suggestive of percussion myotonia. So the rest of the systemic examination was normal. His respiratory, cardiovascular and per abdominal examination was unremarkable. Then basically we have a 5-year-old boy who had come to us with difficulty in standing and walking, difficulty in initiating a task after periods of rest, but on subsequent muscle contractions and walking, he had improvement suggestive of warm-up phenomenon. He had no history of any perinatal insult or periodic paralysis. On examination, he had marked muscular hypertrophy, Herculean appearance, tongue myotonia, grip myotonia, and percussion myotonia. So with this background and the mere appearance of the patient, the first possibility we kept was of myotonia congenita, which is chloride channelopathies, Becker's versus Thompson's myotonia congenita. The other possibilities which we considered were sodium channelopathies like paramyotonia, acetazolamide responsive myotonia, myotonia fluctuans, that is potassium aggravated myotonia, pseudomyotonia, myotonic dystrophy type 1 and 2, and chondrodystrophic myotonia, that is Schwartz-Jampel syndrome, which we'll be discussing subsequently. So the first possibility, and actually our only possibility firstly, was myotonia congenita. because of generalized myotonia, onset being in the first decade of life, and myotonic stiffness, which was more after the periods of rest with the warm-up phenomenon, we kept the possibility of myotonia congenita, and there was actually nothing against myotonia congenita. Also, because of his transient proximal muscle weakness, history of consanguinity in the family, and that the parents were unaffected, we were suspecting Becker's myotonia congenita here itself. As we can see in multiple studies, that Becker's disease is autosomal recessive, and there will be some history of consanguinity like in our case, and there will be moderate to severe myotonia and transient weakness. Also, muscle hypertrophy is more prominent in Becker's myotonia congenita. That is why we kept the possibility of Becker's disease. Then also, Becker's disease can have transient proximal muscle weakness, which actually improves after several strong contractions like happened in our case. And this transient weakness is actually a presentation of a transient depolarization block. So there is a depolarization block, that is why the muscles are not able to contract, and he will have a transient proximal muscle weakness. The other possibilities which can actually present in a similar way is paramyotonia, which is sodium channelopathies. They will also have generalized myotonia, but they will have a paramyotonic response. That is, they will be worsening after repeated contractions. But our case had improvement after repeated contractions. There was no persistent lid lag or any persistent myotonia after forceful eye closure. Also, the myotonia in our patient was not painful, which is usually the case in paramyotonia, and also there was no worsening after exposure to cold. Like, there has been studies which have shown that there is weakness with exercise after the exposure to cold. This is strongly suggestive of sodium channel myotonias like paramyotonia, but this was also not there in our case. So next possibility was estazolamide responsive myotonia. So estazolamide responsive myotonia will have onset in first decade, and there will be no periodic paralysis like in our case, but mostly there will be history of affected family members, which was not so in our case, and there will be presence of significant muscle weakness. There was no pain with myotonia, there was no worsening with fasting, cold temperature, oral potassium supplements, or any infections. Also, there was no history of growing pains, back muscle spasm, or stridor, which are commonly seen in estazolamide responsive myotonias. The next possibility we kept was myotonia fluctuans, that is potassium aggravated myotonia. It can also present with generalized muscle hypertrophy, but it will also have, because of autosomal dominant inheritance, there can be history of similar illness in the parents, and the name itself says that it is myotonia fluctuans, so there is usually fluctuation in the severity. But our patient had symptoms persisting every day, and there was no such thing called good days. That in myotonia fluctuans, there will be good days, that the patient will be asymptomatic for about weeks or so, but that was not so in our case. So the other possibility kept was of myotonic dystrophy. Myotonic dystrophy can actually present in multiple ways, but in the milder disease variant, it can present with muscular hypertrophy and myotonia. But the most striking thing is that in myotonic dystrophy, there will be severe weakness. But in our patient, the weakness is disproportionately less compared to myotonia. So also there was no absence of affected family members, absence of probable anticipation in the family. There was no facial muscle or distal muscle weakness. There was no pain with myotonias. And myotonic dystrophy will usually have some systemic involvement like constipation, hypothyroidism, diabetes mellitus, arrhythmias, or any intellectual disability. All of these were absent in our case. So Schwartz-Jampel syndrome is another condition. As we can see, it can have generalized muscular hypertrophy, and it also has microstomia and micrognathia. So Schwartz-Jampel syndrome can also present with generalized muscular hypertrophy, muscular weakness, and consanguineous marriage actually suggests Schwartz-Jampel because of its autosomal recessive inheritance. But there was no blepharophimosis in our case, which is very characteristic in Schwartz-Jampel syndrome. There was no dwarfism, dysmorphism, or any joint abnormalities. This Schwartz-Jampel syndrome, which is actually because of defect in the Perkilan protein, will, as you can see, can have eyelid myotonia, blepharophimosis. It can have hand myotonia, and as we can see here, it can have oar-shaped ribs along with bullet-shaped vertebra. So these are classical findings of Schwartz-Jampel syndrome, which were not there in our case. So when we started investigating our child, so his routine parameters like CBC, electrolytes, LFT, RFT, all were normal. His CK-NAC was mildly elevated, but not so high that we'll usually be finding in muscular dystrophies. Also, his thyroid functions were normal. We did TFT because of a condition of pseudomyotonia, which I'll be discussing further. We also did ECG for our patient as we were planning to start him on mexiletine, but this ECG showed us a normal heart rate with normal rhythm, normal axis, and normal R-wave progression. We went ahead with electromyography on the same day of admission itself as we were suspecting myotonia congenita, and we were expecting to have myotonic discharges. So our patient had normal insertional activity. On spontaneous activity, we could find positive sharp waves, fibrillations, and myotonic discharges also. On activation, there was early recruitment and normal amplitude MUPs, motor unit action potentials, in right deltoid and right biceps muscle. We were planning to do it further, but the child was not cooperative for further muscle testing. So this electromyography was suggestive of a myopathic pattern with myotonic discharges, suggestive of myotonia. Subsequently, next generation sequencing was ordered to establish definitive diagnosis, and Becker's myotonia congenita was suspected clinically itself, and so we did a myotonia behavioral scale, which is the disability scale for myotonia, and he was actually fitting into score 4, which I'll be discussing. Then he was started on oral carbamazepine, awaiting procurement of mexiletine, which is actually the drug of choice for myotonia congenita. He was started on carbamazepine at a dose of 10 mg per kg, and then on follow-up visit, carbamazepine had actually shown no significant clinical benefit, and his score persisted to be 4. So he was started on mexiletine. By the time we had got mexiletine, so we started him on that, and the dose was gradually hiked to 150 mg thrice a day. On next follow-up visits, after 3 weeks, his score had improved from 4 to 3. So as we can see that in myotonia behavioral scale, he was actually fitting into score 4 initially. He had severe stiffness, which was impairing his everyday duties and activities. But after starting mexiletine, his stiffness did persist, but he had improvement in stiffness and he was able to perform his activities in a better way. Also, we again tried to do grip myotonia and hand myotonia, and we can see that this time he was able to open his hands more quickly. So by this time, when we had given mexiletine and the child had improved, after 40 days, the next generation sequencing which we had ordered, that had also come. So NGS here showed us a pathogenic mutation that was homozygous with autosomal recessive inheritance in the gene CLCN1 with gain of function mutation. Discussing this clinical exome report in detail, so what we found was that there was actually a homozygous variation at the 3' splice site variation. So basically, next generation sequencing, we are interested in the protein coding. So this splice site is actually important for the transcription. So if there is a mutation here, specifically in the CLCN1 gene, and we can see that there was a deletion in 6 nucleotides from 567 to 572. This deletion in nucleotide actually resulted in ineffective protein formation, and that led to this myotonia congenita. Here, as we can see that the depth was 266 times. It means that the depth basically means that how many times that nucleotide has been reviewed. So if it has been reviewed 266 times, that means that we have very low false negative results. Also, this gene has actually not been studied in this Genome 80, that is a genome aggregation database, in which multiple articles and publications are used to produce the genomic database, and hence our patient had a novel mutation. So with the help of clinical examination and next generation sequencing, the final diagnosis kept was Becker's myotonia congenita. There has been multiple studies which has studied the genes related with it. So CLCN1 gene is actually the most important and most frequently found gene which will have mutations. So coming to the myotonia congenita per se, so myotonia congenita are actually chloride channelopathies. So we have Thompson's and Becker's myotonia congenita. Thompson's has autosomal dominant inheritance, while Becker's has autosomal recessive inheritance. And Thompson's has slightly higher prevalence of about 0.14 cases per 1 lakh population. Usually what we find are point mutations in the gene for skeletal muscle chloride channel, CLCN1 gene, which was the same in our patient. Recessive mutations are much more frequent than dominant mutations, and more than 50% of chloride channel mutations occur in exon 3, 8 and 11. So what is basically myotonia? As we saw in our patient, myotonia is a clinical phenomenon. There is delayed muscle relaxation after voluntary or evoked muscle contraction. This we can commonly see in myotonic dystrophy and the non-dystrophic myotonias. All these non-dystrophic myotonias are the channelopathies like chloride channelopathy and sodium channelopathy. We can have action myotonia like we did grip myotonia, tongue myotonia, or we can have percussion myotonia. On repeated contraction and relaxation, the patients might have some improvement in symptoms. That is called warm-up phenomenon, which is seen in myotonia congenita and in our case. But if the myotonia worsens after repeated contractions, that is a paramyotonic response seen in sodium channelopathies. So there is another term which we use is pseudomyotonia. So pseudomyotonia, these are those conditions which have delayed relaxation of muscles, but there is no electrophysiological features of true myotonia. That is like revving engine and this dive bomber signs will not be seen. So these are usually seen in conditions like McArdle's disease. So McArdle's disease, which is a glycogenesis type 5 disease, because of ineffective energy storage, there are muscle cramps, and that is why there is delayed relaxation of muscles, but there are no myotonic discharges. Similarly, Hoffman disease, which is actually an adult disorder, seen mostly in patients having autoimmune thyroiditis. They can have elevated CK-NAC and TSH because of this hypothyroidism. They have delayed muscle relaxation and delayed hunger reflexes. So this Hoffman disease is another condition which can have pseudomyotonia. Apart from that, neuromyotonia and neuroleptic malignant syndromes can also have. This neuromyotonia is a very rare condition. While myotonia has the origin from the muscle, neuromyotonia actually has origin from the peripheral nerve. That is the motor or the anterior horn cell or the axon. Those pathologies will lead to neuromyotonia, which we can see in the form of muscle twitching at rest, that is visible myotonia, or there can be cramps that can be triggered by voluntary or induced muscle contraction. If there is impaired muscle relaxation, we call it pseudomyotonia, because again there will be no myotonic discharges. In fact, there will be a decremental response. The common causes of neuromyotonia are episodic ataxias, hereditary motor sensory neuropathy, paraneoplastic and autoimmune conditions. So while we are discussing myotonia congenita, how it actually happens is that we have on our muscle membrane, we have sodium, calcium and chloride channels. So when in myotonia congenita, there is a decreased chloride conductance. So if there is a decreased chloride conductance, the chloride will not be able to pass across the muscle membrane. So this accumulation of chloride will lead to more influx of sodium. And this more influx of sodium will lead to after depolarization and repetitive firing. So this repetitive firing which is happening because of decreased chloride channel conductance, this repetitive firing presents as clinical myotonia. So chloride channel myotonias are of two forms we've already discussed, Thompson's and Becker's. Thompson's, which is dominant, and Becker's, which is recessive. Both of them have mutations localizing to chromosome 7 and have usual onset in infancy to early childhood. There will be generalized stiffness, especially after rest, improving with exercise. Most important thing is that power is usually normal in myotonia congenita of Thompson's, and weakness can be there in Becker's myotonia. And most of the treatment options which we give are anti-myotonic therapy and that is mexiletine, which I'll be discussing now. So nowadays, the recent articles have come up with precision medicine. So in precision medicine, what we mean is that as we, in the help of this diagram, we have seen that sodium and chloride channels are the main culprits. So we act on these channels itself. So we have sodium channel blockers like phenytoin, flecainide, procainamide, carbamazepine. All these drugs can be given and they have a good control of symptoms. Specifically, if these two mutations are found, then flecainide has a good role. Apart from that, mexiletine can be used, which has sodium channel blockade effect as well as active chloride channels, and that is why it was a very effective drug in our patient. It is a potent anti-myotonic agent and is actually a class 1B antiarrhythmic. Apart from them, riluzole, which is a glutamate antagonist commonly used in ALS, has also shown improvement in myotonias. And tokainide is actually not available, but otherwise it's a very good drug. It is even more potent than mexiletine and has a satisfactory safety profile. Other drugs which have been used for myotonia are tricyclic antidepressants like clomipramine, imipramine. Apart from these, steroids, estrazolamide have also been used for myotonias. Mexiletine, which we have used in our patient, has been shown in multiple studies to be effective. It has effect on sodium and chloride channels, and hence if mutation is seen in SCN4A or CLCN1, in both of them, these mexiletine can be used. It targets the sodium channelopathy as well as the chloride channels. Also, our textbook of Schwayman also says that anti-myotonia treatment with mexiletine is often helpful, and carbamazepine can be used as an alternative anti-myotonia medication to consider for myotonia congenita. This is another study which has shown the effect of mexiletine in myotonia, and it is actually discussed in quite a lot of detail, and with the help of these studies we could come up with that dosing should be actually 150 mg TDS, because they've discussed the adverse events profile as well. If we give 150 mg TDS, the adverse effect profile, the safety profile is better, and also it had good treatment effects. So we continued our patient on mexiletine at 150 mg TDS, and now he's actually doing quite well. So the take-home messages from our cases that careful clinical examination by a super specialist is often more than enough to clinch the definitive diagnosis even for a rare neurological illness like myotonia congenita. Treatable neurological diseases need to be ruled out even when there is slightest of clinical suspicion with the advent of precision medicine these days. Or we should always suspect myotonia in a child with true muscle hypertrophy, but simultaneously we should rule out pseudo-hypertrophy as well. Timely referral to a super specialist should be the dictum in rare neurological illness rather than hit and trial with multiple misdirected investigations and medications like he had gone for 3 years in past hospital admissions. So I would like to conclude my talk with the two phrases that what the mind doesn't know, the eyes can't see, and when there is a confirmed diagnosis, there are actually no differential diagnosis. Thank you.